everybody, to the coronavirus town hall number 2 for Multifamily University. My name is Anna Myers. I am your questioning person today. I have a fabulous panel. We are doing town halls with themes now because there's so much information out there, and it's not all about real estate. Coronavirus is affecting the society in so many different ways, and not everybody. We're also business people, and it's important for us to look at the broader landscape of business outside of real estate. Of course, we're still going to talk about real estate because that's who we are. The other thing that we really want to dig in on is taxes. So we have a fantastic panel here today. We've got Andrew Sherman, who is a lawyer, and we've got Brandon Hall, who is a CPA. So when you have those questions, and you ask a question to a CPA, and the CPA gives you about half an answer and says, but that's really a legal question, so you're going to need to ask a lawyer. Guess what? We've got one in the house. And the same way with the legal questions, if Andrew gets into like a sticky CPA type thing, and he goes, but the CPA should really answer that. Guess what? I've got one for you. So it should be a fun show. I am going to have each of our panelists give a quick intro of themselves, and I'm going to start with my business partner, Neal Bawa.
All right, I'm a recovering technologist. With Anna's help, I run Multifamily U and Grocapitus. We are syndicators. We buy multifamily, student housing, and self-storage properties. We also build them throughout the U.S. About 500 investors, a $250 million portfolio. And I'm just thrilled to be here because Anna's been mentioning Andrew for a while. Brandon and I have connected before. But it's great to reconnect with people because I've heard that there are so many tax consequences, so many legal consequences. And Brandon has also been really deep diving into this $2 trillion package. Oh my God, $2 trillion package.
I know.
And so we're going to hear more about that today. So absolutely thrilled to be here.
Andrew, why don't you take it from there? Give an intro of yourself, and then we'll go to Brandon.
You said about a 30-minute limit on the intro.
Roughly.
I'm Andrew Sherman. I'm a partner at Seyfarth Shaw. We're a global law firm, mid-size, about 900 lawyers worldwide. I'm the local or regional head of the corporate and transactional practice. So work with a lot of small emerging growth companies as well as Fortune 500s. When I'm not practicing law, I'm teaching either at Georgetown at the law school or University of Maryland in the MBA program. And I've written a bunch of books on business growth and entrepreneurship, and really happy to be with you and Neal today.
Fantastic. Brandon, you're on.
All right, I'm Brandon. Nice to be here. Thank you very much for the invite. I run the real estate CPA firm. We are remote, 100% remote,
Yep.
Which thankful for that these days. We only work with real estate investors, so we have about 500 clients worldwide, and I have about 15 employees. I always say I have 15 employees. Mm-hmm. I also run the Real Estate CPA podcast, where we kind of dive into investor situations and talk about taxes and accounting.
I didn't know you had a podcast. I'm going to add it to my list. I'm going to subscribe to that one. Thanks for that tip. Everybody should look into that one. And by the way, we've had Brandon on our Multifamily University platform before. You could, go back and check that out. Fantastic presenter, and we're thrilled to have Brandon back with us today as we dive into these topics. So we are going to get down to, and we're going to be going back and forth. First, we're going to talk about the challenges that businesses are facing. And then we'll go into some of the options businesses have. So let's start with a business question. This one is for Andrew to start out with. Of course, people can chime in, but let's start with a business question. So what should business owners be doing to help their businesses survive the current crisis?
Wow. Now I really do need 30 minutes to answer, but I'll keep it much briefer than that. The first thing I want to say is, look, I've been practicing law 33 and a half years. I went through the crash of Web 1.0. I went through the pullback of 08, 09. I've never seen anything quite like this.
Yes.
That's the more negative perspective. I mean, if you are a business owner or if you have business owners as tenants, that are suffering. Everyone's suffering. I've never seen anything quite this widespread. And in some ways, it makes everybody feel better knowing that there's very few businesses other than maybe pizza delivery that's really thriving right now. And even those guys are, have some challenges. So
Yes.
first, if you are a business owner, the ability to pivot, the ability to have a plan B. I was interviewed about a month ago, even before Corona really started peaking, about the lack of succession planning, contingency planning, emergency planning that so many of America's small businesses are lacking. And now the issue has been exacerbated by COVID-19. So first, do a deep dive on your core skill sets. In what ways can you change your business model, change your revenue plan, harvest and leverage the assets that you have? That is priority one. And we'll get into with some of the other questions that I know you have planned on cash flow management and access to financing. And Brandon and I will both be talking a little bit about the CARES Act, I'm sure. But the first thing is to really do a deep dive inventory of skills, if you will. Are there other revenue streams? There's been a lot of talk lately about the stay-at-home dividend. Are there actually opportunities embedded in this crisis or skill sets that you and your business have that you really haven't thought about or might be sitting, sort of as a Rembrandt in the attic, if you will, that it's time to get up into the attic and bring it down and deploy it. So I could go for a while, but I'm just hoping my real prayer out of all of this is not only do we all have better hygiene, I think none of us will ever wash our hands for under 20 seconds again, but that we have better business hygiene, better, stronger businesses that are more prepared for a crisis. We were really spoiled by 11 years of an incredibly strong economy, and it got us a little bit complacent. And now I think, we've got to do what humans do best, which is to really adapt and pivot as best we can during this difficult period.
And
Brandon
just to
to
throw
add on to that.
my
Yep.
2 cents in there as well. So a couple weeks ago, I was pretty nervous, scared actually, and I have a business coach who runs a pretty large business, and I called him up because I was freaking out, and he was just like, "Look, you just have to get back to your fundamentals, build a plan." Stick to the plan. And once I built the plan, and it can be a cost-cutting plan, and that's the reality of the situation, but you build the plan and you say, okay, when we get to this point, these things are going to happen. When we get to this point, these things are going to happen. Once I did that, I felt a lot better. I felt more secure. And then Andrew, to your point, it is, you do need to pivot. The focus, I think, especially for a lot of our clients, it's not necessarily exceeding our numbers anymore. It's more about just survival. So conserving cash and making swift decisions.
Exactly.
I think that these downturns can really make you make the decisions that you've been putting off for a while. And it's been interesting to see.
Yeah, I agree with Brandon. Anna, can I just make two more quick points on this?
Sure, and then we'll have Neal jump in.
Sure. So one other thing that you should be doing during this time period is stay close with your community. Many of you are familiar with CSR, corporate social responsibility, being a good corporate citizen. So many businesses now are saying, okay, if we can't earn revenues, let's at least build goodwill in our community. Let's give stuff away. Let's use this opportunity for employee training and other examples of, because that will pay dividends later if you strengthen your relationships in the ecosystem. On the ability to pivot, let me just give one example. It's been in the news lately, but I'm particularly proud of them because it's a client of mine, but other distilleries are doing it. We have a client in Northern Virginia called Merlarkey. They make some mighty fine gin, vodka, and whiskey when all of us, when they're back in production. Within 1 week, they were able to retool their plant, get regulatory approvals, and began producing hand sanitizer at their distillery, which they initially gave away for free to emergency responders and local hospitals.
Heard about them, yes.
And now they're selling for revenue. And hopefully they'll be back in business making vodka and gin soon. But when we talk about an ability to pivot, this client didn't start the business thinking they would one day be making hand sanitizer, but they quickly and entrepreneurially saw an opportunity first to be helpful, but also to earn revenue. And, you know, the question to take away from today's town hall is, what's your hand sanitizer example?
I like that.
We watch the news every day. You know, we see companies shifting from making apparel to making face masks and gowns and other things. Every business has that hidden talent that you can do something else during this downtime, and we all hope and pray the downtime is short.
Neal, you want to chime in?
Yeah, and I wanted to, I mean, really great example, by the way. To me, I think it's really much easier for you to adjust if you accept the mindset that we now live in a Corona world.
Yes.
There's this attitude that I've seen people have, which is, hey, by June, I'll be back to exactly where I was. And the answer is, no, you won't. The damage that this thing has already done to the world economy, right? There's this bias to thinking US, but the world economy is so substantial that there are going to be structural changes in the world economy over the next 2 or 3 years. So adjust to a new normal. And we don't even know what this new normal is. Just mentally adjust to the fact that our normal is going to change. And once you do that, then it becomes easier for you to make the changes that Andrew is talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, Neal, I agree with you 1000%. Just a very quick point on this, Anna. There was a great article. I'm a voracious reader and I'm a business news junkie. And so I'm like 6-7 hours a day. I'm watching and absorbing business news and processing it. But there was a great article that supports Neal's point 1000%. And what it basically said was, weren't we heading this way anyway? And didn't COVID just serve as an expediter and a lubricant and a catalyst to get us where we were heading anyway? And, you know, it's something I'd love to come back to if we have time, because
we've got that
Neal's hit the
question.
nail on the head. You know, this is the new normal. I'm still bullish and optimistic about what the new normal looks like. But to Neal's point, if you have your head in the sand and you think, oh, everything's going to be the same as it was, that's not going to happen. And I think the entire panel agrees emphatically that that is not going to happen. But if you embrace the change, kind of what Brandon was saying, and you calmly take a breath and realize some version of where we were and the future is where we're going to be this fall, that's what you need to start planning into.
Yeah, I really like the whole planning thing that Brandon brought up, and how by kind of doing a mental dump, it does let you calm down and relax and take a breath. And what I'd like to talk about now is I'd like Brandon to dig in a little bit on what are the things that business owners should do related to the Stimulus Act, related to what are things that they can be taking advantage of to help them get through this time?
Yeah, so general disclaimer, this is a $2 trillion package that we've been analyzing for a week. So everything you're about to hear, do not trust a word that I'm saying, you know, yada, yada. Okay, the first thing first, I think everybody needs to assess how much capital you need, and you need to obtain one of the loans that has been offered through the various packages that have been signed into law over the past few weeks. So that's the PPP loan, the EIDL loan, regular SB 7A loans, anything like that. If you need capital, you need to be jumping on it now, because everybody else is jumping on it now. So you need to really quickly, like this weekend, figure out how much capital are you going to need through potentially end of July, and go and apply for one of those loans. So that's the very first thing. And then obviously,
how do we know which loan to apply for? Is there some resource that you can identify, like for different types of businesses, whether you're independent contractors or size of business? How do we know what's a good resource? It's a lot of information out there.
That is an incredibly challenging question. Sorry, Andrew, were you saying something?
I was saying I'm happy to help out there. When Anna said you might push a question my way and I push one your way, if you need help on this one, just tell me.
No, I'd love for you to chime in. So you have the PPP loan, which is the Paycheck Protection Program. So if your business is heavy payroll and maybe you haven't like laid off workers, you're still operating. For example, my business, right? We're a remote CPA firm, heavy payroll. The PPP loan is a perfect fit for something like that.
Okay.
If you're laying off workers, probably not going to be the best match for you because there are credits that you could snag on the back end. And if you go the PPP route, you can't snag retention credits and things like that. But for a lot of our clients, our clients are a lot of real estate investors. The PPP loan isn't really going to be beneficial because most of their costs are related to operating the property, not payroll costs. So an EIDL loan is a better fit. That's that disaster loan that everybody's talking about. Now, the big thing that everybody's talking about, the PPP loan, if you use the PPP loan for qualifying costs, it will be forgiven on a tax-free basis. You have to use the loan within 8 weeks on qualifying costs, and whatever you use will be forgiven on a tax-free basis as long as you don't fire anybody and as long as you don't reduce any one person's wage below or more than 25%. So that's the big thing that everybody's talking about, because it is like literally free money. You apply for the PPP loan, you use it on qualifying costs, and if it's forgiven on a tax-free basis, then the loan essentially becomes an owner contribution to the business. So it's literally free money, and that's why everybody's rushing for it. But you got to be careful, because if you're a better fit for that EIDL loan, you should really be going that route.
And you can't do both? I mean, should we just be applying for everything?
You can do both as long as you had already applied for the EIDL before the PPP opens. And the PPP opened for businesses yesterday, April 3rd. But for sole props and self-employed and independent contractors, it opens April 10th. So you still have a little bit of time.
So I'd like to chime in on the real estate investors that are, we have a lot of syndicators that are probably, in our audience now, and there is new information. So we don't have, on our properties, we don't have payroll, because the payroll is on the property manager, although the property pays for it. So we are ensuring that our property management companies are applying for PPP, because then the payroll related items for the property can be covered for 8 weeks. And that can make reduce our expenses, because that money is going to be offset by the PPP loan or grant. And then that is going to help us in terms of people that aren't paying rent. So there's a lot of chatter out there, some great stuff happening in social media that's being shared about this. So if you are a syndicator, if you have property management, you should ask your property manager if they are applying for PPP. And it's a way to reduce your expenses, as you potentially have tenants that aren't able to pay you rent right now.
And on that note,
property managers really hard to do that, and we've already seen some of them say yes.
So on that note, this is where I want Andrew to chime in.
Yeah, I'm dying to jump in here.
Yeah, so real quick. So our syndicates and fund clients are in the same situation. When you look at that income statement, the payroll costs are on their income statement, but they don't actually own the employees. And the way that the Treasury and SBA have interpreted the act is that only the business owners can be the ones that are capturing those employee costs. So the property managers are essentially getting this it's great for them. But the question is, do they legally have to pass you, the syndicate, do they have to pass that benefit back on to you? And that's the question for Andrew.
Yes, Andrew, go for it.
Yes, well, a couple of points I just want to dial backwards on, a few clarifications. One, hopefully everybody knows this, but the EIDL program has been around for many, many years. I mean, it was a big help in Katrina and post 9/11. And so, the new news, as Brandon highlighted, is the PPP program, which is a $350 billion portion of the larger $2.2 trillion CARES Act. One of the questions that came up on the screen was around the tax-free component. And since I know very little about tax, but I do know this one, I can at least answer this one. The loans are non-recourse if you use them in accordance with the guidelines that Brandon was laying out. Non-recourse is a fancy way of saying you don't have to pay it back. Normally, loan forgiveness is a taxable event. So if I borrow $100 from Anna and I don't pay her back, I'm supposed to report that $100 as income. The big benefit, and Brandon can explain this further, is that if I do use it for maintaining people on my payroll, And Brandon did a great job explaining that. That's a key difference between the two loans. One is for emergencies, and one is specifically to keep people employed and keep whatever's left of the economy going. Very different policy objective. As long as I use that within the guidelines, and the guidelines keep getting amended, they were amended twice in 72 hours. So if you're frustrated, so is everybody else. But the bottom line being that these are specific to maintaining payrolls, keeping people's jobs and their medical benefits and other things. And if you use it for those purposes, it's essentially a grant. You will not have to pay it back non-recourse, but there will be no tax consequence of that non-recourse. So that's a very important point. There are loans available for companies larger than 500, but the pool is a little less. And of course, from a policy perspective, the larger the company is, the larger its cash reserves. If you've been watching the news, they were criticizing before the legislation was passed, companies using cash to do stock buybacks and then wanting to get access to these loans. It's like, hey, if you've got enough cash in your treasury to do stock buybacks, then you shouldn't be taking taxpayer dollars to keep your payroll intact. So there's some very fascinating issues around the role of government, federal versus state government. You know, this whole thing has really forced a great dialogue around how do we, the people, want to be governed and by whom, at what level.
It's an interesting question right there.
Real quick, I see a couple questions in the comments here about if I'm an S corporation.
Yeah, those are for you, buddy.
I pay myself a W-2 wage. Can I count that towards the PPP loan costs and then also the amount that you get? And the answer is yes. So if you are an S corporation owner, you're running payroll, you have payroll costs, and that you basically take the 12 months, trailing 12 months average payroll cost, multiply by 2.5. That's your PPP loan amount. Then you have to spend as much as you possibly can of that loan amount over the next 8 weeks on qualifying costs, which are payroll, mortgage, utilities. You can't, payroll costs you have to spend at least 75% on payroll costs. That's the one big caveat. I do see another question about independent contractors. If you pay independent contractors, no, you cannot count that towards your PPP program because the independent contractors themselves can go and apply. So it's double dipping. Now, there is a lot of confusion about that because the act itself does say that business owners can count the payments towards independent contractors, but the Treasury and the SBA walked that back. And the guidance they gave to the lenders was that, no, you cannot. And the important thing here, guys, to really understand is that at the end of the day, like, we can argue about the merits of PPP, we can argue about the calculations, we can argue about how to interpret it, but at the end of the day, it's your banker that's going to be calling the shots.
Exactly.
So
that's a
and
critical
can you target the banker you're working with?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Most
and
people
so
are going to their existing banking relationships.
Okay, so you click on the link to fill it out, but how do you connect with your specific banker in this process?
So you can't go to the SBA for the PPP loan. You can only go to the SBA for the EIDL. So the only way to get access to the PPP is to go to the banker first. But it's fascinating. I've talked to 10 different banks since yesterday, and they all have different calculations, which 9 out of 10 were wrong. And they're all requiring different things. So the important thing to understand about the PPP loan is two important things. The first is that the money's going to run out fast. So you need to get in quickly. The other thing on top of that makes this all just mind-blowingly wild is that nobody really knows at the end of the day how it's going to work. So you just have to try to get as much of that as you can, as quickly as you can, and then we're going to figure it out later.
Let me add one other thing, Anna, if I may. In my opinion, I want to see what Brandon, you and Neal think about this. Look, the PPP is an incredible piece of legislation, and I hope that everyone listening gets their share of the $350 billion, and there might be a follow-on act. But the press has over-focused on this program. There are other avenues to financing. First of all, there's regular old bank loans. If you had a good relationship with your bank, and that's what lines of credit are for, is times like this. Companies that were smart enough to build strong banking relationships and put lines of credit in place, they're not doing PPP or EIDL. They're just doing regular old fashioned increase in my bank line. I had a client about 2 weeks ago said, I don't know where this COVID thing's going. Yeah, I think I'm going to up my bank line a little bit. I've got a good repayment history with them. I've been their customer for 10 years. So don't forget good old-fashioned banking. And also, there's all kinds of state and local programs. There's vendor financing programs. There's not-for-profits that are bubbling up and offering emergency relief. I've seen clients do crowdfunding campaigns, do special couponing and advance payment. One restaurant locally is doing huge sales on gift cards to try and bring some cash in.
Yeah.
Obviously, they'll, hopefully be around to deliver on those gift cards as they're being purchased. There are universities doing reach out. So please, I want to make sure that while we spend plenty of time on PPP and EIDL, we don't leave the participants thinking that that's the only option just because that's the only thing CNN, CNBC, and Fox are talking about for the last 72 hours. I mean, there are other avenues to financing. And while I'm grateful to Congress for their hard work in passing this, and I'm sure many businesses will benefit, it's not the only place to get financing, but access to cash, I'm sure Brandon would agree, is hypercritical right now. But I don't want everyone rushing to the one source and ignoring other sources that are available.
Yeah, I mean, here's an example of sources that we don't usually think about. When this crisis started and I realized that it would be a horribly long drawn out affair, I maxed out my my HELOC, my home equity line of credit.
Exactly.
And basically I took every single dollar out and I actually put it in my mother-in-law's account because in case we have a run on my bank, there's too much money there and I'm beyond that $250,000 limit. So I put it in my mother-in-law's bank. I don't know what I'm going to be doing with this amount, but at 3.5%, it really can't hurt. To me, what I'm doing is basically paying 3.5% of this annualized over a year as insurance that I have.
Exactly. And there's been some comments from our participants about using the HELOC, and it's great. In fact, your mother-in-law called me and she wants to know if I want to run off to the Bahamas with her. I'm thinking about it. So if we can't find her,
that was it.
We're there.
I knew it.
Only
so
two
I have a selfish
cases,
question. I think this one's for Brandon. Related to these laws. What about people who don't have like W-2 employees, but we have a lot of Upwork people? We have a lot of virtual assistants. And by the way, our virtual assistants are worldwide and they are being impacted just as badly as we are. So the whole world is in the same situation. It's a very interesting time to be. But what about those of us that use virtual assistants? Can we take advantage of PPP or?
No, none of those costs are going to count as payroll costs. The independent contractor has to be located in the U.S.
Oh.
And then if it is an independent contractor, again, they can apply for their own PPP loan. So you can't, basically, you just can't double dip. So I can't take an independent contractor, include them in my payroll costs, and then them also go and apply for the loan too.
Exactly.
Okay.
Remember, this, I hate to sound skeptical, but this legislation was passed by politicians in an election year. And Brandon's 100% right. What they're looking for from this legislation is both parties get to raise their hand and say, I saved jobs. I saved jobs. I kept people working. I kept them with access to health benefits. And anything that the weirder it gets outside that circle, the less likely it is to be covered. But Brandon raised a key point. If you've got a lot of gigs and independent contractors, they're themselves eligible for relief, and that's what the legislation's trying to avoid, or the regs are trying to avoid, is the double dipping piece. The impact of all of this on the gig economy, which I hope we'll talk about in a few minutes, has been significant, particularly if you're, a multifamily.
Oh, you're frozen.
We lost
Andrew's feed. While he comes back.
But like kind of to that point though, about the independent contractors, that's also why syndicates can't snag the PPP loan on the employees that are working, because they don't own the employees. The property manager does at the end of the day.
Right, but the property manager, if he has less than 500 employees, is paying for those employees, has been paying for those employees. So the property manager can take advantage of those. And then we have to look at the structuring of it, but we basically get billed less because those employees cost less.
Well, so that's the big question, though. That's what I would love for Andrew to chime in on. I don't know that a property manager has any sort of legal obviously it's the right thing to do, but from a legal perspective, do they have a legal obligation to pass the benefits back to the syndicates?
I don't think so, but they have a relationship to maintain and a client to maintain, right? So
I did see
a legal relationship at all. They were their employees, so any benefits really get accrued to them. But imagine what would happen in the industry if a property manager became known as one that basically took in millions of dollars of benefits on behalf of 24 clients. Well, that property manager would not even exist 4 months from now. I mean, they would become a pariah. So I don't think that we need a legal requirement.
There is a legal opinion, again, social media, that was saying it's bank fraud, that it is a bank fraud if they take the PPP loan and for the property manager, and then they still charge you for the payroll, that it's a bank fraud. So I didn't look at the details of it, but I'm not sure. So there you go.
Sure, but our property managers are not, at this point, to be honest, we've got great property managers that are looking to help us.
Oh yeah.
You know, there isn't a lot of, let's figure out how to commit bank fraud going on.
Yeah, no.
Hopefully not.
That is not the environment that we've been in. Everybody's all out to help each other, and of course to help our residents as well. So I'm not expecting to see that. So let's talk about how are landlords and tenants who are business owners. Okay, we talk a lot about real estate tenants. Let's talk about business owners who are tenants at retail places and that type of thing. How are they handling rent obligations? So because so many are having to shut their business, what is going on between the landlords and the business owners that are tenants?
Well, I think go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I could start this one off, but I'm sure everybody's got some views. So first of all, there's a fact specific, is the business completely closed? If it's a restaurant, but they're doing takeout and delivery, but they've had a cut in their non-essential. So, you first want to bucketize what is the status of the tenant in terms of operations. Obviously, if it's completely shut down, then the negotiations begin. And I've had maybe 50 calls in the last 2 weeks from clients saying, we can't pay our April rent, or we're not going to be able to pay our May rent. What do we do? Yeah. And let me offer some practical advice, and I'll kick it right over to Neal. First, be transparent. I mean, get on the phone proactively with your landlord. Don't wait for the landlord to send default notices. If you have any relationship, some tenants have been in the property 12 months and barely even know who to call. And some tenants have been in the property for years and years and have already renewed leases and have a rapport and trust and leverage that relationship. Are you a single unit operator, or do you have multiple units? Some of the retailers we're talking about have 300 and 500 and 1,000 units with multiple large developers. And, a dialogue needs to happen either between lawyers or among principals. Another big issue is landlords themselves come in different shapes and sizes. Some are large, powerful, publicly held REITs, and some are, little family companies that may have 2 strip centers and themselves are struggling to make mortgage payments to their lender. And so I don't think there's a one size fits all approach here, but there's certainly been a lot of rental abatements, rental restructuring, rental deferments, standstill agreements, estoppel agreements. You're trying to put an arrangement in place that will allow you to get to the other side. None of these landlords, whether they're big or small, regional or national, want empty space. They don't want empty space at the other side of this crisis. They want the tenant to re-enter the space and reuse the space. Yeah. And there's been a lot of legal, interesting arguments which have not yet been figured out around force majeure, around habitability and ability for quiet enjoyment of the space. I mean, all the legal theories that are running around out there, it's obviously have not had a chance to be litigated yet. It's not like there's, oh, we had COVID-19 3 years ago and the court ruled X or Y.
Right.
There's
Whole new
also the
landscape.
impact of business interruption insurance. So there's a lot going on in this area.
Neal, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I wanted to say that every situation is different. What we've seen so far already is that in the retail space, if you're a tenant in a strip mall, you're likely to see more flexibility from that landlord than if
Yeah.
you were a tenant. Because, and the biggest reason for that is with checks on their way, Treasury announced last night that direct deposit checks have started going out a week early. So they were supposed to go out April 10th. They started going out today. So they're saying that if you have a direct deposit set up, and by the way, if you're listening to this and you're eligible and you don't have a direct deposit set up, please, for God's sake, set one up, because checks could get to you on September 30th, right? Instead of getting to you next week.
How do you set up a direct deposit, Neal?
So the Treasury website, Treasury website has a link that says you don't have a direct deposit set up, click here and set one up now. So
Cool.
don't wait
That's new. That wasn't there a few days ago. So everybody take note of that.
I'm saying you can go set up a direct deposit with us and we'll send you
the Treasury Department. Okay.
If you're brand new, because we have to validate it, but there's a way to do that. Bottom line is, what landlords are seeing is that people that are about to get their checks are likely to use it for food and for rent, right? Food and shelter tend to be top of mind. Well, if you're a nail salon and you shut down 15 or 20 days ago, that's really not as top of mind for you. So we are seeing on the retail side, there being more flexibility being offered. A lot of it is rent deferment, where they're basically just saying, okay, we're just going to take 2 or 3 months of rent, or we're going to take it out of your deposit. Keep in mind that as a tenant, you have a deposit, whether you are a retail tenant or you're a tenant in an apartment complex, you can be pushing your landlord to use that deposit to pay a portion of your rent or all of your rent. And most landlords out there, when they've been asked that question, I've been asked that question as a single family landlord. I have 2,000 apartment units, but I've also been asked that for my single families, and I've been very flexible in saying, yes, you can tap into your deposit to pay rent. Because what is important is this: we need to get beyond April. So everyone out there, if you have a strategy, your number one strategy is, how do I get beyond April? Because I promise to you, I'm not a real estate guy right now. I feel like I'm a COVID researcher, and I'm looking at the math, and I can tell you this. Today's April 4th. On May 4th, the world will feel much better about COVID. On May 4th, they'll feel a lot better universally, because whether it's New York or it's California, their rate at that point will be massively lower than it is today. So mentally, people will feel better.
So you're talking about flattening the curve, Neal.
Exactly. The curve will be much flatter, and people will mentally feel better. That doesn't mean that we don't have a long fight ahead of us. We do. But at that point, the mindset, the business mindset, the individual mindset will be better. So you need to get through April. And if that means that you need to tap into your tenants' deposits, you should do so. And if you're a tenant, you should be asking to tap into that deposit.
And by the way, be on the lookout in your local jurisdictions for emergency legislation that prevent evictions, like New York and other jurisdictions have done. So, there's a couple of pieces here. One is not getting thrown out either on a commercial or residential basis. Second is what to do with the rent payment if you can't make the rent payment, around communication, abatement, estoppel, deferment. Some retail businesses have participating leases. Maybe there's something you can do when business reopens with a little extra participation to get an April or May rent waiver. You could back end it with a little bit of incentive. I mean, think creatively, work with your landlord and ask the question, what's the landlord's needs? I mean, if they're a small landlord with just 2 strip centers, what can you do to help them to make it a mutually beneficial relationship? If they're a gigantic REIT that's publicly traded with billions in cash, they just want to know that you're not going anywhere and you'll be back, just like Neal said, when we get on the other side of this. And that's really the key right now. I agree with Neal. It's a 30, maybe 60. I mean, even if Neal's off by 30 days, by June 1, even if he's wrong, and I do think he's right, but even if he's wrong, it's June. It's not 3 years from now or 5 years from now. I don't believe that. And people need to communicate. You've got plenty of time. Get on the phone. Every landlord knows that retail, hospitality, and related industry tenants have problems. And then on the personal side, the residential side, you know, the middle class is under siege right now until they get some of their checks. The gig economy is under siege right now with so much less work to do. And, you know, there's a human side of this, that if someone's been a good tenant and they've always paid their rent, you know, can you cut them a break for a month or two without you suffering too much if they're going to get back on track, you know, by the summertime?
So
And
I want
you know,
to
that's
turn
probably
the
the best answer I
conversation.
can give on that one.
I want to now, we've been talking about landlords and tenants. I want to now talk about banks and borrowers. And don't worry, Brandon, we're going to be getting to you. I'm really excited about some of the real estate tax bonuses in there. So, but let's change the conversation to say, well, what is the negotiation and communication between the banks and the borrowers?
Well, the good news is, unlike 2008, 2009, when banks had taken too much risk and arguably were violating federal and state banking laws and other things, we went into this, thanks to Dodd-Frank and other steps, we went into this very quick recession with the banks being in very good shape. So most banks aren't happy when mortgage payments are missed. Most banks aren't happy when bank payments are missed, but many of them, until we get to the community banks, perhaps smaller banks, are in a position to have a month or two of default, as long as there's going to be catch-up payments, because as rent comes in, then mortgage payments can in turn be paid. So the bankers I've talked to have said, hey, we'll work with our real estate owners and other business borrowers, but only if we, you know, have some trust, and it's a two-way street, and we're not, you know, the last person to know the covenants have been triggered, tripwired, and other things. So if you're a real estate owner, developer, or even just a business borrower, be in touch with your bank early if you haven't already. It's not like this news will come as a surprise to them. You won't be their only customer that may need a month or two waiver or estoppel. Get a short standstill agreement of some sort in place, so that, you know, if your banker leaves or gets riffed or whatever, there's written evidence, the fact that the bank was going to give you an extra 60 or 30 days to make those payments. It's sort of a similar conversation than we just had, but now the parties have changed,
Right.
and the breadth and depth of the pockets, if it's, as long as it's a regional or national or even international bank, most of our banking system, knock wood, is in much better shape than it ever was in 08, 09.
That's a great comment. I do feel better about that. What do you think, Brandon? Do you have any commentary on mortgage and, you know, what does your CPA say?
Banks are well capitalized. They're in good fundamental positions, but we have seen across our clients pretty much a real tightening of any sort of financing. Even our clients that are just rock solid, have the best fundamentals, have the best banking relationships, they're just not getting financing anymore.
So financing being for new projects or projects that they were under contract, is that type of financing you're talking about? But real estate investors are having a hard time closing loans?
Yeah, that and refinances. I mean,
refinances.
Banks are really tightening down, and I think it was smart, Neal, to hit the banks when you did. We did have a few clients that did that. The risk, of course, is that we don't know how it's going to play out, so we don't actually know how much cash we need. But those that waited, now we're going to get into May. They're not going to collect rents. Now they're going to know what they need to talk to their bank about, but now the banks aren't going to be lending. So, you know,
talk to Neal's mother-in-law. That's what they should do. That's what you should tell your clients.
Hey, I already called first dibs to run off with his mother-in-law. I got first dibs there. But I agree with Brandon with one little footnote. What we're seeing, at least in the DC area, Mid-Atlantic region, is if you're going for a new relationship, as Brandon said, and I'll do this in my best West Philly accent, forget about it. I mean,
Mm,
no new relationship, new loans. I mean, if you just walked into the bank looking for a de novo, forget about it. But
yeah.
if you're an existing long-standing customer of the bank and you need to bump your line a little bit, particularly if it's within your primary relationship lender's lending authority, I am seeing a little bit better picture than what Brandon described. Not a lot better. I'm not strongly disagreeing with him at all. I'm just saying that if you haven't done it yet, I would do it soon. If you have a good long-standing, one of our local clients, they just bump their LOC up just a little bit more, have a little more cushion, depending if this goes an extra month or two longer than they thought. That they were able to get approved pretty quickly. But as I said, only because they have a long-standing relationship. They've been a good borrower. They've never defaulted. They've always given heads up if there's going to be a covenant tripwire. So it's just a footnote to what Brandon said. I still mostly agree with what he shared.
Neal, so you talk to a lot of syndicators, a lot of people that were in the middle of deals. They're trying to close deals. Do you want to chime in about some stories or some anecdotes about what's going on out there?
Yeah, firstly, thank God that we're not in the middle of a deal like that.
Yeah,
So the first things that we've heard is that banks are being nasty.
yeah.
We have had people with pens in hand about to sign on deals. So one day before a deal closed, and banks have walked away. And there's going to be lawsuits where people are going to accuse those banks that you were too late in the process to actually walk away and you damaged our business.
Right, because the money had gone hard, right, Neal, for many of these
money's
people.
gone hard at this point, so they
Yeah.
can't really get out. We've heard, so I also, I'm a passive investor myself because I believe in multifamily, so I invest with other syndicators. So there's a syndicator called Greenleaf, and they walked away from 2 deals, and they were collectively $80 million, and they were already hard on money. And so on the syndicator side, there have been people who walked away because they believe that they can come back to the same property in 6 months at a lower price.
Oh,
And the reason they're thinking that is because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac now have instituted these larger impounds, right? So what they're saying is
yes.
a year worth of mortgage and tax and insurance has to be impounded. As a result, you have to raise a lot more equity. And if you have to raise a lot more equity, the property is worth less. At least that's the prevalent belief. We'll see how long that limit remains. But there are prudent bankers, and this group called Greenleaf is actually a Wall Street group, and they basically walked away from their earnest money. We've seen lawsuits where people have tried to walk away from earnest money, citing force majeure or saying that this is a one-time event. It's a act of God, blah blah blah. So we've seen a lot of nastiness go on in that commercial market. We've also seen spreads go up like crazy, which means that if you were being quoted low 3s in mid-Feb, you're now being quoted high 4s. And so interest rates have spiked massively.
Yep.
I don't think they can stay that much. Given where treasuries are, they can't stay there. But right now, there is an enormous amount of fear when it comes to banks to lending out. So Andrew's right. Existing relationships will work. New relationships, you probably want to focus more on the PPP.
Yeah, and
Andrew, you're frozen. I'm gonna go to Brandon. I want to talk about some good news. I want to have Brandon talk to us about what is in the this program, this stimulus package for real estate investors. What's in there that is compelling for real estate investors?
Yeah, some good stuff. So probably the biggest 2 things. First, they changed the net operating loss provision so that you can now carry a net operating loss back 5 years. And that's not just for real estate investors, by the way. That's just anybody that has a net operating loss, you can now carry it back 5 years. Why is that significant? With the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they lopped off the fact that you can carry net operating losses back. So you could only carry them forward. And you could only apply the loss to a limit of 80% of future taxable income. So really limited your ability to, if you can create losses, limited your ability to actually claim those losses. So the first thing that not the first thing, but one of the things that they did is they changed the net operating loss provision to allow any net operating loss that you're able to create, carry that back 5 years and apply it retroactively. Why do they do this? They want to create a situation where people that have net operating losses can claim refunds and continue contributing to the economy. So good stuff there. And I'll explain how that works with real estate investors in a second.
Okay.
The other thing that they did is they suspended temporarily the excess business loss section of the code. So the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act implemented the excess business loss section of the code. And basically what that said is if you have business losses and if they are in excess of a certain amount, then they are considered an excess business loss and you have to carry them forward. So for example, if I have a business that generates $100,000 and another business that generates a $700,000 loss, if I'm married, then first I net them together. So my net loss is 600,000.
Right.
And if I'm married, I can take 500K, that's my limit, 500K of that net loss, and I can apply that to other income. Where is this beneficial? If I am in Silicon Valley and I get a lot of RSUs and I'm liquidating my RSUs and I've got a $2 million gain, then I can take 500K of my business losses. But that remaining 100, that's an excess loss carried forward. So what they did is they just said, we're going to start this in 2021. And we're going to make this retroactive to 2018. So if you had excess business losses in 2018, now you can go back and refile those tax returns. Now, how is this relevant to real estate investors? If you are a real estate professional, so let me back up. If you're able to create non-passive losses from your real estate portfolio, this is important. And typically you have to be a real estate professional in order to create a non-passive loss. You have to be a real estate professional and you have to materially participate in your rental portfolio. When you do that, your rental losses are non-passive. Or you have to own a bunch of short-term rentals. If you own short-term rentals, you don't have to qualify as a real estate professional on the short-term rentals. You just have to materially participate in the short-term rental activity. And then those losses will be non-passive. So what do? You look at all your acquisitions that you made in 2016, 17, 18, and 19. And then you look at, can I qualify as a real estate professional in 2018, 19, or 2020? And if the answer is yes, then on the 2018, 19, or 20 returns, you qualify as a real estate professional and you cost segregate all of the acquisitions that you've made within the past 5 years. And basically you file a 3115 and a 481A. And what you're doing is you're taking all that missed depreciation in the year that you qualify as a real estate professional. That's going to create a really big non-passive loss and potentially a net operating loss that you could then carry back 5 years. The timeline.
Like you need help from your CPA to apply for all these things, right?
You definitely need some help.
Saying, like it's brilliant, but it's not simple, right?
Yeah. The key is to understand if you qualify for something like this. First off, you need a pretty solid portfolio, not extensive, but not two properties, or two small properties. If you have one 300-unit property, then you're good. But you need a pretty good sized portfolio. You can't be working a W-2 job, or your spouse can't be working a W-2 job. One of you has to be available.
I was going to say, check.
Yeah. Well, one of you has to be available to qualify as a real estate professional, and the W-2 job is a limiting factor there. But if you think that you could potentially qualify, meaning you or your spouse don't work, and you're making a lot of acquisitions in 16, 17, 18, or 19, or 2020, you can go through 2020 with this. Then you definitely need to talk to a CPA and be strategizing. You have until October 15th, 2021 to implement this.
Now this is next year. Yeah, that's a huge benefit for those of us that are very active in real estate on a full-time basis. So that's staggering, by the way, an entirely unexpected gift.
Yes. Anything else for the real estate investor in there? I guess we talked about the qualified improvement property provision.
Yeah.
Is that something you could mention? Talk a little bit about?
Yeah. So qualified improvement property is improvements that you make to the interior of a non-residential property. So office building, retail, warehouse, anything like that, non-residential. If you're making improvements to the interior, that's qualified improvement property. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they intended to make qualified improvement property have a 15-year life, which would have qualified it, which would have made it eligible for 100% bonus depreciation. But they accidentally left it out of the final bill. So qualified improvement property in 2018 and 2019, until the CARES Act last week, had 39-year life and did not qualify for 100% bonus depreciation. They have made that technical amendment, and that is retroactive to 2018. So if you own commercial property and you have made any sort of qualified improvement property and any sort of improvements to the interior in 2018, 2019, you need to go chat with your CPA and potentially amend those tax returns to capture that 100% bonus depreciation.
So how happy are you that the deadline was extended from 4/15 to 7/15 with all of these changes that are now being just fire hosed onto the CPAs in our lives?
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. We actually made the decision internally to keep operating as if the deadline did not move.
Oh,
And the reason that we did that is we want to keep moving forward rapidly for our clients so that they can get refunds. But what we did is now we've pulled a couple people off of tax preparation to specifically just do the advisory piece. Let's look at the tax returns and see if there's any of those opportunities that we just talked about, if those exist.
yeah. Okay, let's jump back into business. You had mentioned, and a lot of real estate investors fall into this category. You were talking, Andrew, about the gig economy, and how has the gig economy been impacted, and what are some of the things that are available to people now through the stimulus package?
Well, you know, hopefully you can hear me now. I'm not
Yes.
frozen. The gig economy is having mixed results right now. The Lyft and Uber drivers and people that rely on, us being at work and not at home are suffering very badly. The point I was making, if you're a multifamily housing owner in an urban area like DC, for example, where you might have a whole building filled with young gig workers who now have no income, that's been very, very painful. And many of them do not have a second source of income to turn to until these checks start coming out if they've applied. There are parts of the gig economy. My daughter has her own business. She's a gig worker. She does social media consulting. She's been working from her apartment for the last 2 years. So she's had almost zero impact on her business. So, understanding your tenants better, understanding, the impact better. I mean, the middle class is under siege. Some have, retooled and repositioned themselves. I mean, think about, the person that might be cleaning your house once or twice a week hasn't been in your house for probably 30 days and won't be in your house for 30 to 60 days. My wife and I made a decision that we're going to continue to pay whether they come to our house or not, just to try and be helpful. A friend of mine's son, he worked part-time at a deli and part-time as a dance instructor, and no one's coming in for dance lessons right now. So he's now a Papa John's delivery driver and actually making more money than he did with the combination of the two. So, it just depends on which type of gig, is affected, but clearly the booming of the gig economy, which was relying on, people consuming certain services, is going to slow down for a little while. It will be a bit before it fully comes back. I think to Neal's point, while all of us may feel comfortable by May or no later than June, I was thinking to myself the other day, how quickly will I go back to a Nats game? Or if the hockey season or basketball season restarts, do I want to be in a place with 10,000 or 20,000 other people? Things like that might take a little longer to recover, or they'll open, but you'll see people gradually coming back in. When all of the major sports postponed their seasons, you saw athletes and owners step in and offer assistance there, which I'm sure was greatly appreciated by stadium workers and vendors and others. So it's something worth monitoring in your future town halls as to how is the gig economy doing, both as contributors to the economy, but also as tenants.
Okay, we're at an hour already. So we need to take.
And just a suggestion. I mean, give
Yeah.
me 100+ questions.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. We're going to take some
30-second
questions.
answers. Like limit our answers to 30 seconds because there's so many questions.
And there's great questions out there. So we are going to start diving into the questions. By the way, people, I'm focused on the Q&A box, not so much the chat box. Here we go. Very short answers, please. I'm a mom and pop landlord. I'm still confused on what options are available to me to pay my monthly expenses, especially my mortgage payments, if I'm no longer able to collect rent. Can you please discuss what are the options for this person?
I think the first thing is to talk to your lender. It doesn't matter if it's Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac at this point, whether even if it's a local bank. Every lender at this point has a forbearance program that they are either working on or have already released. That needs to be your first option. But before that, push your tenants to use some of their deposits. And keep in mind, most tenants can pay partially. So if they can't pay, push for a partial payment. So don't give up on the tenants too easily.
Yeah, and they should be applying for unemployment benefits. There's money there for them. So make sure they have access and know where to go to get help. Help your residents understand their options, because that's how they're going to get money to pay you
exactly. And as Neal said earlier, there is no one size fits all. There's no across the board solution. If you're a small landlord, you've got some commercial tenants, one might be a barber shop that's completely closed. One might be a small restaurant that's doing takeout and delivery only. A third one might be essential services. So, you're going to have a sit down, not a physical sit down, a virtual sit down or conversation with each one. And as Neal implied, maybe I can't pay all my rent. Maybe I can pay part of my rent. Maybe cobbling together partial rent payments with some benefit will allow you to make a partial mortgage payment. But the forbearance agreements, the standstill agreements, the estoppel agreements should come as no surprise to any mortgage lenders across the country, big or small, no matter what region they're in. I mean, this is the new normal until we get on the other side of the Fauci curve.
And get it written down, he keeps saying.
Yes,
get it in writing.
Please.
Okay. Do you think multifamily or real estate in general will be going down in price?
That's my belief. So the answer is, at this point, multifamily may even be affected more than single family, remains to be seen. Not because of the strength of the sector. Fundamentally, this is a very, very strong sector. So any impact that you see is likely to be contained to 2020. But the reason that there's going to be impact is lenders are backing off and lenders are requiring much larger impounds. Both of those two things together, and the fact that there were a lot of buyers in the market that cannot raise equity anymore because investors are in shock. So you take the two things that are happening on the lender side and the one thing that's happening on the investor side, that trifecta, I think, is strong enough for there to be some price reductions. But mostly in the multifamily market, I think we'll just see a decline in volume. People will sit on their properties if rents are coming in. If rents are not coming in by June, July, then it's a different matter. You could start seeing a lot of fire sales in August, September, and October. But I don't think that that's going to happen. I think rents will be fine. So you'll see some reduction in price, but a lot less volume. On the single family side, it's very much open to how long this lasts. If it's short term, I don't think single family is going to get affected as much. Higher end single family unquestionably is already being affected. Volume is down. Somebody asked that question. Volume is down in the San Francisco Bay Area 65% in the month of March 28, 65%, which is a stunning number. We did not expect that to be that low because open houses are still going on at this point in time, and it's legal for that to happen, but it's still down about 65%. So it was a huge and immediate impact, far beyond what most people thought it would be.
Can I piggyback on that just for a second?
Sure.
There's a couple of situations I'd just like our listeners today to be thinking about. Number one, the breakouts have been deeply concentrated in assisted living and elder care facilities. Will that cause people to rethink whether their parents are going to now live with them because people don't want to take risks? Number two, many businesses are not going to return to normal, as Neal said. Will people be looking for housing with extended home offices and more privacy? I mean, the real estate industry will change. Even at the residential level, people may be looking for, a little suite for their parents because they don't want to put them in a home because of what happened in Washington and what's happening in Maryland right now. They might be looking for a bigger home office because they may only be going to work 2 days a week or hoteling at work. People will be looking for different office configurations if you're a landlord for office space. I mean, things are going to change. Neal is 100% right, and do not have your head in the sand or think that as soon as COVID passes, people will be back to normal. This is going to stay with us, and the choices that people make in real estate, leasing, co-living. One of my younger associates in our group, she said, I'm looking for a whole new set of amenities next time I go to rent an apartment. I want a bigger printer downstairs in our business center. I care less about certain amenities now. I want the bigger gym. If I can't go to my gym, I want to be able to go to the gym in my building. It's going to change.
Yeah.
And I'm not a developer, so I don't have all the insights on this, but I would definitely make sure we talk about this for a minute.
I've got a few questions that I'm going to fire at Brandon. People have some very specific questions, which I think are good ones. I understand there's a salary cap of $100K per year per employee for the PPP. Does that mean that employees with salaries over $100K can't qualify for loan forgiveness?
Yeah, good question. I've been trying to rapid fire answer some here by typing too, but
Good.
Yeah, so the 100K is a cap. So you can count the first 100, but you can't count anything in excess. So if I pay somebody 110, I can count the first 100. The excess 10 is not factored in.
What if I have two businesses, one real estate rental property and one retail shop? Can I apply for two EIDL loans?
I believe that you can. You just have to check the affiliation rules.
What is the best thing for nonprofit that doesn't have payroll? They've missed a fundraising event because of COVID.
That I don't know about.
Okay.
There are some nonprofit rules, but they've been evolving. I would keep an eye on those and look for updates early next week, potentially.
What would you say are the key elements of determining whether someone that works for you is an employee versus a contractor?
There's a 20-step IRS test. This issue of joint employer has been going wild for the last 4 or 5 years, so there's no easy answer. But the IRS on its website and a bunch of, NFIB and other, you can access the independent contractor test. It's got 18 or 20 elements that you apply, and it's pretty good. I mean, you'll kind of know by 7th or 8th question in that checklist whether somebody is truly independent or not. And if in doubt, lean on the employer side from a compliance perspective, because that seems to be the trend.
Okay,
that's
regarding
a much better answer than mine, because I was going to say, well, we could be here for an hour.
Yeah,
regarding
exactly.
mortgage forbearance, what do you guys think? Will there be credit impact, your credit score impacted by mortgage forbearance requests?
I think on the single family side, it's unlikely to be impacted. On the multifamily side, we are still on the commercial and multifamily side, we're still waiting to hear back from them. There hasn't been a lot of clear guidance on what happens on commercial loans. On the single family side, it's highly unlikely that at this point your credit is going to be impacted in any way. The key thing is not to, you have to communicate with your lender. You can't just stop paying. I mean, that is going to hurt you. Communicate, over communicate, and I don't think you're going to be hurt.
What about the flip market?
I'm sorry, one interesting related question. I had a question posed the other day. Will my unemployment rates go up next year if I have all these unemployment claims? And at least what we heard back from the District of Columbia, and I'm sure other jurisdictions, is no. They're going to understand that these uptick in unemployment claims were due to a special circumstance, and they're not supposed to raise your rates significantly or your contributions significantly. But, we really won't know till 2021, 2022, whether they stick to that. Brandon,
what about the flip market? If someone still has a job and good credit score, will banks give them a loan to buy houses to flip? I guess
yeah, look at Sarah's answer in the chat box, by the way. Chase, which is a pretty major lender, said credit won't be impacted during this time.
I'm pretty sure in the act itself, if you qualify for the forbearance that the act describes, then you're fine on credit.
Are there any CARES Act benefits to investors with W-2 income? So I guess people, I mean, it doesn't matter if they're an investor or not. So what are the benefits available to W-2 income in the CARES Act?
You might still be eligible for the 1,200, 2,400, 3,400 piece if you're as an individual or under 99,000 or as a couple under 198,000. But other than that, I think it's, yeah, it's kind of thin.
If my employee count has gone down due to attrition, can I use PPP to hire new people using PPP?
So if you replace any full-time employees or restore any substantially reduced wages that occurred during the period of February 15th, 2020 until 30 days after the passage of the CARES Act, when compared to February 15th, 2020, then full forgiveness is allowed again.
This one's for Neal. What does the future of syndication look like? New deals coming in? Do you think there's going to be a freeze on syndication deals?
I don't think there's going to be a freeze. I think you're going to see a significant and very significant reduction in activity for the next 4 months. I don't see there being a huge impact in syndication in 2021. So the next 4 months, huge impact. The next 4 months after that, the last 4 months of this year, well, are up in the air depending upon whether credit starts to get unfrozen, whether Fannie and Freddie withdraw some of these super onerous things that they've just done. So it definitely is up in the air, but the one thing that is not in doubt is that you're going to see a very significant reduction in syndication activity in the next 4 months.
Yeah, Anna, can I add to that real quick?
Sure.
If you're a smaller syndicator, and I always use the dentist from Potomac off River Road, that's just a DC thing, and that dentist's net worth has dropped by 40% and their 401k is much smaller, they're going to be feeling a lot less angelic than they were before. And Neal's right. Until the family business offices and the angel investor types and the smaller syndicator investors start feeling like the market's coming back and their net worth is not in jeopardy and their retirement is not in jeopardy, they're just, I think they're not going to want to look at deal flow until probably the fall. So if you're in the middle of a Reg D offering or a syndication, be ready to have people taking chips off the table and leaving the casino until they feel more comfortable coming back. I totally agree with Neal's point there.
We've been talking about different sources of money like HELOC and these types of things. But Brandon, can you talk about new coronavirus retirement distribution rules? Do we have access to our retirement accounts? What does that look like? I've heard some stuff about that.
Yeah, you do. So normally there's a 10% penalty if you take a distribution that has been waived. You can take a $100,000 coronavirus related distribution. You can only take it if you were diagnosed with SARS-CoV-2 or COVID by a CDC test, if you or your spouse or dependent is diagnosed with the virus or disease, or if you experience adverse financial consequences as a result of COVID, then you can take the retirement distribution. You don't have to pay the 10% penalty. You can spread taxes out on, so the distribution itself is still income. They're still subject to income taxes. You can spread the payment of those taxes out over 3 years, or you can repay the entire distribution by whatever 3 years is after you take the distribution, and it's going to be considered a 60-day rollover. So you can take it out, hold on to it, and then repay it in 3 years, and you don't have to pay tax on it.
Off-campus college students are being told they cannot break their lease, even though they went home due to university closings and they're not included in the stimulus. What are their options if they don't pay rent?
From what I'm hearing, they don't have a lot of options. The government would have to step in to see if those student housing companies have to pay. At the current time, the student housing companies and their organizations have taken the approach of, hey, sorry, you paid us, we don't have to pay you back. But I have to point out to everyone that's listening that there are many, many student facilities throughout the United States that are not empty. They're full because that particular state is allowing people to stay. And to our absolute surprise, the students don't want to stay with mom and dad anymore. If their facilities are allowing them to stay there and be quarantined there, we are seeing a lot of students have not left. So Utah, for example, is allowing students to stay in their student housing facilities even though college is closed, and they are seeing well over 80% occupancy there. So keep in mind, and a lot of people have asked this question, so I'm going to answer it now. You know, that there's a lot of student housing questions. We are seeing very strong enrollment for the August semester. At this point, it looks just like any other year. Obviously, if there is a COVID-related prevention where students can't come back in the second half of August, then student housing will be affected. But the current time, there doesn't appear to be significant impact on student housing enrollment for the fall semester. Like we just
exactly. Just a quick follow-up to that. I mean, I'm in the middle of a semester of teaching right now at Georgetown Law, and none of those students have gone home. I mean, it's just courses are now online. We're not allowed to all be in a classroom. They all prefer to be in their apartments or their student, housing, school's still on, and there's still exams and midterms and lectures. It's just, it's all on Zoom now, or all on a online platform.
That's right. Yeah. We haven't seen it. I mean, there's a mental shift towards housing.
I think the consensus, Neal's 100% right, is it's either going to be online classes where students still want the dorm experience, or it's going to be, back into the classroom if we get a green light from the government on COVID.
Okay, yesterday there was news of a bank in West Virginia failing. Do you think it's going to become a pattern like 2008?
No, I don't think so. I mean, at this point, the bank sector is very well capitalized. And by the way, banks fail all the time. A bank failed on February 15th before COVID started. Banks fail all the time. At this point, the likelihood that this causes a credit crunch is extremely low.
And ironically, West Virginia's got one of the lowest reported COVID cases. So they probably failed for some other reason.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. Any good tips on promoting rent collection in case some bad apples are trying to take advantage of this situation, especially the moratorium on evictions for 120 days that's in place?
Yeah.
Well, just real quick, that moratorium only applies to covered properties, and a covered property is one that has a federally backed mortgage. So it's important to understand that you might be in a situation where you don't actually have a covered property, and there is, well, unless there's like a state order where you can't actually evict people, but from that actual federal piece has to be covered.
That's a good point.
Very good point, because there's so many apartment communities that have loans that are local bank loans, and so many have loans that are not Fannie and Freddie loans. People don't even realize that order doesn't apply to them. The first thing is research if the order applies to you. Second, if you think that there's bad apples, dig in. Basically tell them, I need proof. I need to see that you've actually been laid off. I would like to speak to the business owner for your business. I want their phone number. We will be making an actual phone call and checking to make that sure that not only have you been laid off, but that owner has not applied for the PPP or its equivalent so that they can pay you, right? So the best thing to do with bad apples is to drill down, and many of them are just going to back away and start talking about, using their deposit instead, or just at some point they'll just come back and pay you. Remember, it's okay to continue this dialogue over this month, because I can tell you that as we go over the peak of COVID, a lot of people will mentally start feeling better. And some of the people that are just bullshitting you and have money in the bank are eventually going to say, what is the point? Why am I fighting my landlord? Let me just pay it.
Right. And one of the things we've done in a couple of our properties is we've had a couple properties where we were giving $50 Visa cards. In one case, it was a $75 Visa cards for anybody that paid their rent early or by the first of the month. And interestingly enough, when they sent that information out, there was one property where people texted back and they're like, is this a scam? Is this real? It's like, all I have to do is pay my rent before the first and I get this, free money. And we're like, yeah. And the residents were incredibly grateful for that, because it wasn't like you had to be impacted. Hey, we're all impacted by this situation. It's hard for everybody. And we had, in both of those properties, we had 15% response rate of people paying before. And our collections on those two properties, we've compared our collections now versus our collections a month and a month before that. Our collections are higher than they normally are by a significant margin. So there's a lot of people that are not yet impacted and they're able to pay their rent. But you need to get creative with how to work with your tenants, how to keep your communities bonded together and feeling like we're on your side, you're on our side, we're going through this together. That's a major messaging that we're putting out to our residents, and doing lots of things to help people that are within the community that need help as well.
Yeah, and you know, the message here is this. I
Yeah, and
feel
just
like
be
landlords
smart
are,
too. I mean,
I mean,
we had a situation recently where a guy was claiming he couldn't pay his rent, and I found pictures on Facebook of him posting at a beach with pina coladas in his hands, and I thought, you know, you can't have it both ways, either hardship or no hardship. But you know, I think that we're in an era of transparency, and bad actors are going to be you know, going to be exposed sooner than later compared to 10 or 20 years ago.
so Andrew, was my mother-in-law in that picture? I mean, maybe somebody.
No, not yet. Not till I run away with her. So that's coming up soon.
All right. So my bottom line is, I think landlords are too freaked out by what they're hearing.
Yeah.
Talk to more of your tenants and you're going to feel better, right? So the landlords that are continuously in communication with tenants and lenders are feeling a lot better than the ones that are just making stuff up in their head.
Yep. So here's a question. What happens if you find out that one of your residents has coronavirus and you've got a large building? What, you know, it's going to happen. People are going to get sick within your community.
Follow the CDC protocol. Yeah, there is a CDC protocol for every single building, every single city. You have to follow it. Please do not, there's personal privacy issues. Please don't go and tell the other tenants. You're not allowed to do that. There's personal privacy issues if this person disclosed this. You must follow CDC protocol. Don't just say, I'm just going to take all the other tenants on this floor off. You can't do that. It is not up to you.
Yeah, but let me just make one legal, put on my lawyer hat for a minute. It's very important that number one, you follow what Neal just said. And number two, you know, there's going to be lawsuits come fall against some property owners for people who lost their lives or were very, very sick. And if you're not doing deep cleanings and regular cleanings and keeping your building clean and ultimate hygiene and other things, I mean, you could be liable. So there's no cases yet. I can't point to 10 cases that just got ruled by court. It's way too soon. But please, if you own property where people are living and working, you know, I see it. I go into my office, even though our office became remote, once a week. I see the cleaning crews coming in. I see the hand sanitizer filled, even though there's a shortage of hand sanitizer. You know, if something goes wrong, it's going to be my fault, not theirs. And they're taking all the steps to keep that building as hygienic and sanitary and clean as possible. So be smart. You know, don't expose yourself. You know, if the hand sanitizer dispenser's empty and you haven't cleaned the bathrooms in 3 days, you're really setting yourself up for a potential claim. So be smart about it. Be proactive if you're a property owner.
Neal, would you suggest pulling HELOCs, paying the interest on it, and holding the cash basically as dry powder for when prices start to adjust on properties?
Yeah, if you don't think your lender's going to pull your HELOC anytime soon, then take your time with it. But I think so. I mean, to me, it's a 3.75% interest rate on mine, or 3.5. And to me, I think that's opportunity cost. I don't want to take the risk of that HELOC disappearing. And so I've already banked it. And if you're comfortable with paying that 3.5 or 4% that you're going to pay on your HELOC, then yes, that's opportunity cost. And I have to say this, I mean, I'm not much for the stock market. People know that I don't enjoy that because of, you know, all these, I don't want to fight against high frequency algorithms. But I've jumped into the stock market myself because there's so much opportunity right now, and mentally I need to prepare myself for that opportunity. So I started buying stocks. And what sort of stocks am I buying? I bought Royal Caribbean. I bought Boeing, because I think that 3 years from now, these industries will have recovered. 3 months from now, they are not going to recover. So, and maybe not even for a year. I think that in a longer time horizon, there's going to be a recovery there. So bottom line is, use your HELOC, because that mentally suggests to your mind that you're getting ready for action. And that's what you should do. You've already made this mistake in 2009 of freezing. Don't do it again. You're about to get a buying opportunity. If you're in stocks, you've already seen it.
I'm going to have each of you pick one question from you can all see the questions going here, and you're going to wrap it up by answering that one question. So pick one that's your wheelhouse. Brandon, you've been digging in on these questions. Do you have one in mind to answer live?
Not yet.
Okay.
there were a lot.
Neal, yes, or Andrew, jump in. Pick a question.
I'm gonna take Susie Truax. She's a friend of mine, and she's talking about whether there's going to be an inventory shortage in the Bay Area ahead of this because sellers have taken homes off the market. In the Bay Area, yes, in the short run, you're going to see a severe inventory shortage because the Bay Area already had a massive inventory shortage, and it's going to make it worse. But you're going to see this dual sort of environment where the homes that are on the lower end of the spectrum, there's going to be a lot of people fighting for them when we reopen. Let's say we reopen at the end of May, you're going to see a lot of people fighting over those. And then homes that are at the higher end of the spectrum, you're going to see a lot of price cut downs because lenders are going to back off, right? And also keep in mind, one of the key things is that in the Bay Area, people were able to use stock options to buy property. Well, with the stock market down this much and there being a negative sentiment, lenders are not going to allow stock options as much. So the higher end portion of the market is going to see larger amount of inventory when we reopen. The lower end market actually, yeah, it could get worse. The inventory shortage is really, really bad, Susan.
Okay, Andrew or Brandon, have you selected your one question that you're going to answer live and finish off with?
Yeah, I can go.
Okay.
So there's an anonymous attendee that asked, I'm in the construction business. Can we use the PPP program to pay subcontractors, non-employees? The answer is no, because they can all apply themselves. So you can't double dip. You can only count employee payroll costs. They have to be on your payroll.
Okay. Andrew? You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry. I just scanned about 50 of the questions, and I think 49 were for Brandon. So I didn't stumble on one to easily answer, but I will answer one of the questions that you and I talked about yesterday, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
To prepare. And that was, what's the impact on mergers and acquisitions, on, whether it's property acquisitions, property management companies, non-real estate deals. M&A is going to be impacted, kind of like the same cycle that Neal talked about with syndications. We're not going to see a lot of mergers and acquisitions, M&A deals, probably in the next couple of months, as sources of capital and parties are on the sidelines. But in every dip that we've had, whether it's a U-shaped dip, a V-shaped dip, a W-shaped dip, an elongated U, there are buying opportunities both in buying businesses and consolidation, whether it's real estate or not real estate, and in buying real estate itself. There will be people that pass. There will be homes available and apartment buildings available for sale that might be estate sales. I don't mean to sound morbid, but there will be significant buying opportunities. Cash is king. If you've got cash or you can get access to cash, begin planning, late spring, early to midsummer or early fall. I think we're going to see an uptick. The fourth quarter of this year could be a very active period for mergers, acquisitions, real estate acquisitions. But between now and then, I'd be coming up with your business plan. I'd be gathering your cash resources. I'd be gathering your team of advisors and get ready to, jump in for what could be a pretty big sale at Nordstrom's, if you will.
Okay. With that, we are at an hour and a half. Time just flew by. I am very grateful. Oh, I'm going to have Neal answer another question because I didn't put up the poll.
Okay,
so there's 450 of you left in the room. Neal, can you take another question? Your choice.
Yeah. I think the first question I want to take is, and people have been implying this, is, Brandon, we're going to have to bring you back because there's about 100 unanswered questions, and people are now asking us to copy those questions and send them to you so that you can answer them. So we're going to do that. We'll send you all the questions and we'll figure out how we're going to get the answers.
I think we need to clone Brandon a couple times. I mean, there's a lot of activity for him
at this point. So we're going to, the answer is we will try and figure out how to do that. And I think that we're going to have to do a redo of this webinar here simply because there's so many CPA related questions. Yeah. And some of those questions are clearly related to the $2 trillion act, right? So, and as Brandon said at the beginning of this webinar, don't hold him to anything because everything's changing every day. Yeah. Right? New guidance comes in from Treasury almost daily on key parts of the act. So I wanted to point that out, that we are going to do this again. And it seems like it makes sense because there's about 100 nasty emails in my mailbox. About 300 of you didn't get into this webinar. 300 people tried to get in that couldn't get in. So we're going to have to do that again. So I wanted to point that out. We will do it again.
Okay, and Neal, why don't you take another question? The poll, people are answering the poll. Please answer the poll so we get some learn a little bit about you. Neal's going to take another question, and then we're going to have Brandon take another question as well, since there's so many for him.
I'll take one on student housing. Kevin Keithley mentioned that there's this force majeure clause which might apply to student housing. And the answer, Kevin, is the student housing companies are going to say, no, it doesn't apply. The students are going to say, yes, it does apply. And if the matter is going to end up in court. But for the moment, the money is already with the student housing bodies and doesn't look like anybody's going to give up a penny of it. So.
But hold up. If the university has not closed, I don't feel good about the force majeure argument putting on my lawyer hat, because if the university hasn't closed and it's continuing to offer classes, but just online, you know, remember, very few universities have actually shut down. They've just said to the kids, stay in your dorm room, work from your dorm room, eat in your dorm, stay safe, and do your work online. So I'd have to agree with Neal on that. It might get litigated, but it's not a great argument so far.
Brandon,
not in the student context.
Do you have a choice question for us?
There's just so many about the EIDL.
Maybe you can kind of summarize, create kind of a summary question.
Yeah, so somebody's asking about the 10K grant, and I think that's important too. So the EIDL, you can get a 10K grant, and it should be funded to your account within 3 days. Now, as of yesterday, I wasn't aware of anybody actually receiving their 10K yet.
Not yet.
Yeah,
not yet. It's kind of a mini cash advance, so you don't go to a payday lender while they're processing the paperwork. It is a great little benefit of the legislation that got tacked on to the EIDLs.
But it's important to know that is a grant. It does not have to be repaid, and you can refinance an EIDL loan into the PPP loan. So if you've already obtained an EIDL loan and you're now realizing that PPP loan is better for you, you can refinance the EIDL into the PPP.
By the way, I've never been on a webcast where so many people directly ask Brandon, "Are you taking new clients?" That's an accomplishment. You clearly have the good mic today.
Brandon,
it's sure, baby.
Brandon, make sure you look at Susie's question. You got a gig as well, so she invited you to a gig.
Nice.
Can I show you guys something funny real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know, like haircut places are closed and everything. So my wife cut my hair today, right? High and tight, nice, looking good. But check this out. Ready?
Oh,
nice.
Oh, God,
I was like, oh man, good thing that didn't happen in the front, huh?
Wow. You're gonna be Mr. Hot for a while.
Yeah, well, she was like, okay, I got to clean up the back a little bit, and I was like, okay, and then she just went, wah. I was like, what was that?
See, that's what happens. That's what happens when your barber starts texting during the haircut. Right?
Oh my goodness, yeah. You know, it looks good from the front.
This has been great. So we will have to figure out how to do this again. Thank you, everyone, for staying. I think there's over 400 of you at the 100-minute mark. Thank you for staying, and we'll figure out how to get the questions back to you. We will also be sending a video recording out over the next few hours. So Jennifer's waiting for us to finish so that we'll send this out to you. And thank you very much. And we'll see you again on Town Hall 3.
Yep. See you, everybody. Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Neal.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Stay home.
Bye.